So this is the video for the end of the When the Future Won't Hold series. So this is the video for the end of When the Future Won't Hold the series. So from that standpoint, I wanted to kind of thank you for being with me on this. I tried a few things differently here. I did readings of the poetry and so on. And they seem to be well received, I guess, from the comments that I've gotten on them. I want to kind of wrap it up and say a few things about what's going on, as I tend to do. So as I am recording this, it is Good Friday. It's the end of my spring break, and I've taken this spring break to do all these recordings and such. I wasn't trying to write about abstract uncertainty. I was trying to name a condition many of us already live inside, especially autistic people, especially those of us whose minds were never fully reflected by the world around us. What happens when the promises we were given stop working? What happens when the future you were told to build can actually hold your body, your mind, your labor, your needs, your truth? So this series has been my attempt to sit with that honestly, not to manufacture any kind of hope, but to clear enough space for a more honest kind of possibility. So this series was never about the future in abstract, right? It was about what happens when the social script of the future breaks. It started for me in a way that many of these things tend to do, with a couple of conversations happening in different spaces. My life as teacher and counselor to younglings who I've known now for the entirety of their high school time, where they began with one regime as they went into high school, and they're ending their high school years with a totally different reality. In my own family, questions about plannings and such. And the reality of when I bought the ranch in 2010, gas was $3 a gallon. And that was very expensive because California is always the most expensive in the United States. Now it's between $6 and $7. So it's doubled. About everything in my life financially has doubled in that span. My pension is worth half. So purchasing power has collapsed. The American empire is at an end. And I will likely see it fully collapse. My children, definitely. My students, definitely. So this series has been about what happens when that social script about the future collapses. All the usual bromides, the planner and the app and all of that kind of stuff that are still being sold to autistic people, to gestalt processors. They're kind of meaningless now. And so what happens when that promise that we were handed, that hard work, that, we can build stability in our lives, we can plan ahead, we can save. What happens when that stops holding? Right? What happens? So even if I say I've done everything right, I saved for retirement, I was vested in all of that, I have a defined benefit pension. And so you would think that's great, a union pension. It's the anchor of society for retirees. And yet, on the other side of that ledger, the dollar has reduced its purchasing power through no fault of my own. It's just the debasement of currency, capitalism's inflationary tendencies, all these kinds of things that I cannot influence, right? And so for someone like me, autistic, gestalt, that I can see the whole of it. I can see that it's not recent, right? That these policies that are causing all of this stuff to happen began even before I was born, right? I was in high school when Reagan went absolute bonkers with austerity and whatnot. And that same Heritage Foundation that was guiding him then is now ruining things for us still to this day. So that whole to part is indeed kind of depressing. We can see it, we can feel it, and we can sense the patterns. But I bring Cassandra into the poem because nobody believes her, right? And we kind of elder gestalt processors, the elder autistics, especially in the global north, we've been saying these kinds of things as long as we've been alive. And if we've had parents who are kind of similarly minded, they've been saying those things too. And so, there really hasn't been a viable future for us. Some of us have had the privilege to carve out a bit of something, right? But now with war and, the cost of my commute going up by 25% in the matter of a month, and we haven't even felt the shock yet in America. I heard a very interesting way of describing why we're so delayed in feeling that shock versus, say, Africa or Asia or Europe. And that's because these oil tankers, they move at the speed of a bicycle, right? And so the fuel that we've not yet received in these tankers that are moving across the ocean, they left before the war started. And so they will all have arrived and offloaded in America in the next 2 weeks. And then the shock will begin that others are feeling around the world right now. And so it feels very disingenuous, very dishonest for me to counsel people on a future with this in mind. I don't know what it looks like for $8 a gallon gasoline. I don't know what that looks like. And so I began the series with kind of a simple truth that some of us are being asked to build lives inside of futures that were never actually made to hold us. I think about that very much. And so the series is both personal and then it's a systemic attack, right? It's not just emotional or internal, it's material, right? It's political, it's economic, it's infrastructural, right? Some of the writings that I've done because I'm sitting inside of a system that does not recognize me at all. I'm arguing with systems, my employer, my school, for accommodations, and they're telling me, Jimmy, no, I don't think I will, because I don't want to and I don't have to, right? And if I rail against that at work, I could be let go, right? It becomes too expensive to employ me. Then my employer can find a way to be rid of me. And then what? And then I'm just another autistic adult facing 80% unemployment rate or greater, right? But in the middle of that, I think about my pay packet now. It's really, numbers-wise, no different than it was when my daughter was born, right? And she's quite old now. So in 25 years, that stagnation of wages, right? The number is pretty much the same, but the purchasing power is less than half. So that means the cost of survival is higher, right? And so we're asking younglings to plan, knowing full well all of these variables. Inflation being lied about, unemployment being lied about, education systems that you don't belong in, right? And increasingly, as it becomes more expensive to accommodate autistic and gestalt processing students, universities, as I have found, as my daughter has found, just say, no, sorry, we don't have to. The law says we don't have to. And if you don't have a diagnosis, if you're one of the many self-diagnosed, I don't know what to say to you, honestly, right? There's no way, no legal standing for you to come after a school or an employer or, your residence hall or whatever to say, I need accommodations, because they gatekeep that. They require that paperwork. And so you go into a healthcare system. If you're in UK, God's help you, because we know how long that system takes to get, to the head of the queue. And you may be still alive, you may not survive that long, right? In America, I think currently, if you have like a health maintenance plan, it's about 2 years. And it would cost you, even with that, roughly $2,000 or so. And if you go to private practice and you have that privilege to do so. It's still a year and a half of different specialists and so on, and maybe $4,000 or $5,000, right? And if you do not have the means, then you stay self-identified, right? Just like I identify myself as a gestalt processor, but there's no test for that. There's no certifiability. I don't have a membership card or anything like that. It's just, I know what I am and I speak the truth about it. I'm a hold apart person. And so that has implications. And I know that I've written in the past, how we can find the proof, the evidence about gestalt processing in the DSM, in the field notes for diagnosis of autism. But the system does not care about that, right? They're all about maximizing quarter-over-quarter profitability. And so the series has been about us and where do we fit in that, right? And so like the first lie that we're handed is that we failed to plan properly, to build properly, to properly prepare for this future. But, so often the structures were already cracking, right? When I was in secondary school, that was Reagan and the beginnings of austerity. In the UK, that was Thatcher, right? And so from that standpoint, I didn't really stand a chance. And I'm very lucky and very fortunate that I landed on my feet and everything. But the system was already being sold off. The system was already being dismantled. And I was not yet an adult. So how could I know, right? And so what meanings do I make, right? I love the power threat meaning framework because it gives me these scripts. Who is in power? Well, obviously, neoliberalism, capitalism, imperialism, all of these kinds of isms, right? What is the threat? Well, I will be extracted from until I can no longer contribute anything more. And what meanings do I make of this? Well, over time, that meaning has kind of changed, but I think about it in relationship to my own children, my students, right? In terms of windows and mirrors, can I see myself in this future? Can I see through to a better tomorrow? And increasingly, the answer is no. I don't know what this means, right? Because when it comes down to it, when I see, especially now, it's Autism Awareness Month, Acceptance Month, Education Month, whatever you want to call it, what we realize in these awarenesses is that the future is being written by people who don't imagine us in it at all. There are people after the root cause of autism. Well, why do you need to know the cause? Well, so you can prevent it. And what does that mean? Right. And so I start thinking about The Speed of Dark and Elizabeth Moon's book and my own poem about that. There are autistic people that are designing studies so that we can find epigenetically all of these different genes that turn on and off that create the autistic genome. And science is right behind there. So what happens if you have that information? What do you do with it? What kind of future exists for autistic people? What value might autistic people have to society? And indeed, that's kind of the premise of No Place for Autism, right? What happens if we get rid of autistic? What happens if we get rid of gestalt processing? What does the world look like then, right? And if they design an in vitro test for autism and they have the same success rate in removing autism from society as they have for Down syndrome, and they cheer it, the next step is to find a pill so that these poor suffering autistic people can be remedied. And that kind of is the premise of Elizabeth Moon's book, Speed of Dark, right? And so if you're autistic and listening to this and you're older, would you take that pill? Right? So that's always the question I'm left with that book, The Speed of Dark, right? And so I'm not trying to be a doomer. I'm not trying to be pessimistic or anything, but, there is a point at which we have to start asking honest questions. And that's what this series has been about, not to gaslight, because I know gaslighting is particularly harmful for gestalt processors and autistic people. So I don't want to do that. I wanted to talk about that, right? And so, here's kind of where I bring in the labor aspect of things. My teachers' union has called for a strike. It's happening on April 14th. I don't think either side will budge on their demands. I think both sides have wanted a fight from the outset. And I am a fifth generation trade unionist. I'm a retired trade unionist. And so naturally I will honor the strike, and I know what that means financially. So yes, my wages are low. Yes, the union's bargaining for better wages and for insurance and all of this stuff that exists because we have no national health care here. But the cost for me to go to work has doubled in the time that I've been living in this place. When I bought this place, I commuted into downtown, and now I commute to just north of downtown. So that form of cost of reaching my work is a form of extraction, right? Housing, transport, insurance, food, schooling, medical care, right? Every threshold of this now charges admission. Everything is monetized, subscription-based, right? It's not just inflation. It's costs that did not exist now exist. We used to have DVDs, CDs. Now we have subscriptions. I used to be able to buy Adobe products, and now it's subscription, right? Everything is subscription. And now even they want automobiles, different things to be subscription-based, and there's a bit of pushback about that. And so people would naturally respond, colleagues at work, the Dr. H, you have that very big expense in gasoline, maybe you should get an electric car. Well, I don't have a car payment. I have a 2016 Honda Fit. It doesn't have a lot of busyness to it. It's very low tech, and I like it that way from a sensory standpoint. I don't like all the bells and whistles and stuff. I don't like all the big screens. I know some people do, but I don't. But the bottom line is if I'm struggling financially now, and I don't have a car payment, and I don't really have reserves, because I'm the sole support of a family that includes a disabled person, and there are 5 of us in this house, how am I supposed to afford an electric car? Especially since interest rates have gone to almost 10% in America, and the prices are upwards of $50,000. So how am I supposed to afford that? And then there's the infrastructure of that yes, I lose the electric, I lose the gas side of it, but I live in the mountains. It's below or near freezing for a majority of nights. And electric cars don't tend to do well in very cold temperatures. I live at 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters. And so the descent is fine. The ascent is a very big strain on gas mileage or on electricity. And so that reduces the effective range as well. But more importantly, there is no charging infrastructure at my school. It has solar panels, has all these things, but we're not allowed to plug into it. So I must find a car that can reliably, in the cold, navigate the 1,000-meter climb every day on a single charge, almost 200 miles. Under $50,000, that car does not exist. So how am I supposed to do that, right? Especially since we're fighting for my union, about wages and increase and stuff. So we have all of these things, people, and I don't fault them for saying these things, but these things that they throw at you to kind of satisfy themselves, like, oh, I told Dr. H that you should just get an electric car. That would solve everything. No, actually, it would not. I don't have that $1,000, right? Because insurance is more when you don't own something, and insurance is more for electric cars, and the cost of tires is more, and all of these things are more. So I don't have that. I'm a school teacher. I'm retired. I'm just trying to get by. I can't afford that, right? So that factors into this series, this collapse of futurity. When your government says we do not want petrol cars on the road, and you don't have the ability to replace it, and you don't have the ability to relocate, because the apartment that I used to live in the city of Los Angeles is triple now what it used to be, and it certainly wouldn't fit my whole family in it. And we bought this place because we could afford it on one income, and we still have one income, and that one income hasn't grown very much at all, and we live very frugally, and we are not extravagant in the slightest. And from that standpoint, we've been able to manage, but costs have increased, and here we are. So we're at a very interesting point in society. And so again, that collapse of futurity, the future won't hold. I'm not just worried about myself, and I am quite old. I'm past my autistic best by date, but my kids aren't, my students aren't. And so what does that mean? Right? That's what I've been talking about in this series. And so you add the gestalt lens, you add the autistic lens. A collapsing future means anxiety. If you tell your doctor you're anxious, you get flagged, you get recommended for therapies and drugs and this kind of stuff. When you're not defective, you're not disordered, you're just reacting to material reality. And so the system would rather medicalize it, blame you for it, prescribe whatever medications for it, than have national health care, have a national pension system, have equitable wages, right? Because that cuts into the bottom line in our financialized system. So in this time, in this crazy time, part of this series is me doing what I always do, creating the scripts that I need to survive and have conversations, right? Because when times are like this, gestalt processors have no reliable scripts. We've never been here before. I don't have mirrors where I can see myself in scenarios and then try to mitigate some new kind of advice. There's no windows. I kind of see out of this from my point of view, right? And there's no, especially now in this new presidency, there's no culturally sanctioned pathway for solving this problem in my life, right? I'm being legislated against. I'm being, between being autistic and gestalt and trans, right? I am essentially America's most wanted. Can it travel in this country because of different laws and stuff like that? So how do you picture a future? Right? I used to travel all over the place. I have thousands upon thousands of frequent flyer miles. And now the system that I was involved in, I cannot travel it because everything lands in Texas, where going to the bathroom for me is criminalized. And so many of the states in America, that is the reality. So then what do I do? Right? And they come with advice. Oh, move to a lower tax state, move to a place where petrol is less expensive. Well, it turns out that all of those places are hostile to me. Florida, Idaho, Texas, Louisiana. They all have laws that criminalize some aspect of my life. Why would I do that? I think about my Canadian relatives who retired to Florida. And now you have private equity buying up all of the properties. So those that landed in mobile home parks and stuff, private equity has bought the park and doubled their rent. Well, if you're a pensioner, how do you handle that? And so we're seeing that conversation play out. Florida has the least amount of regulations on housing, right? Because in America, housing is a commodity. It's a financial thing. It's not a right. You don't have a right to housing here. And so how can you imagine a future if you have no idea where your parents are going to be living, right? Because you have no idea where you're going to be living because you're still living with your parents. And so the whole family situation is precarious. How do we do that? What are the scripts for that? And so it's not just I can envision a future. It's what happens when you were never allowed to know yourself so clearly that you can even imagine one, right? You're being told that you cannot be trans. You'd be told that you shouldn't be autistic. You shouldn't be a gestalt processor. You're just a defective neurotypical. And just, use the planner, you'll be fine. ADHD is a myth, right? It's just precocious child. It's a good smack, right? How do you build a future around that? And so I think the deepest wound here is not that the future becomes hard to imagine. It's that for many autistic people, especially gestalt processors, we were never given enough mirrors or windows to know what kind of future would actually fit. And so from that standpoint, there is grief, right? Not kind of sentimental, but there's grief for lost timelines. There is grief for deferred recognition, the late diagnosed. There's grief for careers that required self-erasure, right? I think I've described, that keeping myself to myself for decades. What does that cost? There's a grief for the loss of what could have been had that not been required. The grief for institutions that promise safety and delivered sorting, right? Public school time, church time, all of these kinds of things that you must hide aspects of yourself to be part of it, right? The grief for the self that kept trying to fit inside of a future that was hostile from the start, right? And again, I acknowledge the kind of privilege, but at the same time, we have a new ritual in my house on the Sunday after I receive my pension payment. We have kind of a special meal because when I was my kid's age, I couldn't see a future. And when you cannot see a future, there is a form of kind of passive suicidality that exists, I think, amongst autistic people, that you just kind of say, well, I'm just going to go with it, right? And so you're not really planning for 55. You're not even planning for next week. You're just, living by the seat of your pants and having a grand time. And when you're 22 and you're queer and you're in San Francisco, you're not thinking about 55. You're not thinking about retirement and how you're going to live because you're having a grand time and you can see tomorrow, right? And so I know it's a very sensitive topic to bring into the series, but that is personal to me. That passive suicidality of not like active, like I want to end it all now, but if the end came tomorrow, I don't know that I would fight it, right? And what that does for future planning, right? And so the fact that a strong enough tomorrow's together, I paid attention to enough of the fine print and I filled out the forms and I did what I was supposed to do, one foot in front of the other. I made it to retirement, to me, is massive, absolutely massive. And I've been crying about it since I saw my first pension payment, really. And so internally in the house, that is a celebration, right? That I didn't see myself at 55 when I was 22, 21, 18, 16, 12. And so part of this is me kind of revealing bits of my life and finding scripts for it finally. Not to assign kind of blame, but just kind of explain a bit of who I am to myself and then to you. So, part of what this series has been doing is making some room for grief. Not because that's the end or anything, but because we cannot build honesty on top of false promises and call it hope, right? And so I want to be authentic. And I know I've said this before. This might be the first time you're watching me on video, but first and foremost, these scripts, these articles, they're for me. They are me and my very high language support needs writing around a thought, around a sentence I heard, around a question I've been posed, and composing that answer. So I have this very long form gestalt then I can use, right? So this is a version of delayed echolalia for me. This is how I support myself because I've been supporting myself for so very long. And then, as I've talked to Kathy about, I never imagined anybody would be reading these things, really. I found a place to quote them on Substack. I don't know how much longer Substack will exist, but, I'm happy that it's there. And so I would put them there because it's a place that I can access them. And I was doing Google Blogger before, but that became untenable. And then I started seeing followers and subscribers and like, well, I guess that's amazing. I don't know how to handle that necessarily, emotionally, intellectually, followers and subscribers, free subscribers, paid subscribers, all of that kind of stuff. It's still a bit of a mystery to me because I'm not creating content for consumption. I'm just writing things down to kind of support myself in the moment. And I don't know if that comes across well enough, that I'm not setting a research agenda. I'm not necessarily a self-advocate in that. I'm not, I mean, other than like writing things down about the naysayers and whatnot, I'm not really out there banging the drum. I'm just a wee school teacher and doing my best with minimal tech to support myself. And so, for me, it has become a kind of hopeful practice, right? And so, from that standpoint, it's not like, oh, but wait, there's still hope if you buy this 6-part. No, I don't want to do that. But for me, the hope has always been like in my children and my students, right? And trying to live as authentically as possible, right? My hope is not confidence in institutions, right? I was in Google stuff, I'm in Substack stuff, I'm whatever. I don't really have faith in the market. So my hope is not there. My hope is not optimism, because I've been failed so many times. I've been taken advantage of so many times. I grew up in violence and poverty. So I know the system is not really there. I think for me, hope is relational, it's communal, it's local. And so from that standpoint, I do want to say that I've met some amazing people from this platform, Substack, and occasionally someone will reach out and wants to chat to me live. And when it works out, I love it. I absolutely love that contact. And so this week, having the benefit of time and being home, I had 2 of those conversations, and I'm very blessed to have people that not only understand me, but are very much like me to have conversations with. It's just very unfortunate that, Cher is in the Pacific Northwest and Chris is out in the Upper Midwest. And then we cannot be here to have a cup of tea together, that we are such a very small part of the population. And yet, technology can bring us close. And so locally, we can do things like mutual aid, alternative infrastructures, but we are so spread apart. And so, I kind of practice this solidarity by doing my best to say yes when somebody asks to connect, to say yes to conference invitations, even though I'm incredibly shy, even though I panic. And, even though in this instance, I have my notes here in front of me to keep me on track and stuff, as I tend to do. For me, it's like I'm leaving you with the future as promise, and it's something that we can make. And I don't know. I don't know. But for me, hope is finding connection where I can. The conversations of this week are very special to me. And the people that I met through conferences are very special for me. So if the official future won't hold, then perhaps, my task is not to keep begging into it. Please let me in. Please let me in. I would like to eat. I don't think that's going to work. I think the task is to build smaller and build truer. And I think that will tend to be more alive. And so supporting each other in our growth and our development and the things that we need, right? I think that's where this is. And so hopefully you weren't too horribly impacted by the weight of it. It's not about despair, this series. It's not about kind of refusing counterfeit hope or, I think it's about seeing clearly, about naming things clearly. And I think if enough of us do that, I think that's where the hope comes from, right? Not that I could do it or whatever, in spite of, all of the madness of my childhood and young life and stuff, but it's really about kind of what remains when the sanctioned script collapses. How do we do things? And finding forms of life beyond institutional permission. And so, the future, when the future won't hold as a series, is not about giving up on tomorrow. Not at all. It's about refusing to confuse the institutional promises with real possibility, right? And so I think, from that standpoint, when there are no windows and mirrors, it can feel like there's no future at all. But sometimes I think the work is simpler, perhaps harder. But sometimes the work is to become that mirror for one another and to become the window, to make enough shared light that something livable can finally be seen. So again, many, many thanks to Cher and to Chris for having those conversations with me this week. But if the future they sold us won't hold, then I say let it fail. I'm enough of I'm enough of that on the political side. I don't want to fight to support the empire and stuff. We were never meant as gestalt processors, as autistic people, to survive by trying to fit inside that shape. I don't think that will ever work, will ever be sustainable. I think we survive by recognizing one another and by building what we can actually hold. So with that, I will thank you for your time, and thank you for your support and for your kind comments, and we'll see you soon.